All right, so here we go again. Another day, another crisis. This is your World War III late night emergency alert update. I've needed 24 hours to take stock of the situation and develop what I believe is a more comprehensive meta-analysis of how this Middle Eastern crisis ties into the broader geopolitical landscape. Because it's very important that we don't have tunnel vision on this one particular crisis. With like the flick of a switch in 24 hours, suddenly nobody is talking about anything but the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and for good reason. If you're not familiar with that region, this is an unprecedented level of escalation, never before seen since 1973. However, we must not let it overshadow everything else that is going on. Must pay attention to what the other hand is doing at the same time. And as I'm going to show you, the other hand is up to a lot. I have some insider information with respect to what is going on in Israel. And I'm going to be talking about what is likely going to come of this, how it began, how it ties into Russia, how it ties into Ukraine aid, the whole 9 yards, okay? How it ties into oil prices, which are likely going to spike because of a looming threat of war with Iran now. But this is big. It's unprecedented. The numbers, just by sheer numbers, the amount of rockets, the amount of dead people in a day, all dwarf what we typically would see in the span of one of the worst years of Israeli-Palestinian fighting. So make no mistake, this is it. This is the big one. Gaza is going to be torn up. It's going to be worse than Bakhmut. Because what most people don't realize is that you have 600,000 hardened Gazans, all of which who've probably had somebody in their family die by the hands of an Israeli soldier or the IDF or Israel in general, or been some way negatively impacted. And I'm not here to take sides of the issue. We're trying to objectively report on it. That's the other problem with this, is that people are becoming incredibly divided. It's insane to see the fracturing of the anti-war right over this particular issue. People who were just unified yesterday along the lines of being anti-Ukraine war are now suddenly fighting with one another. And that's evidenced in the comment section of the Twitter pages of Jordan Peterson or Robert F. Kennedy, where it's completely spiraling out of control. Okay, people are fighting with one another. It's clear that the right is very divided along this issue. However, what you're going to find, and many people are suspecting that, well, this means that, Ukraine is now going to be, attention is going to be taken away from Ukraine. They're not going to get as much aid. Biden just approved $8 billion in emergency aid funding for Israel. I don't even know how that's possible, but I guess just with a stroke of a pen, you can just give away $8 billion. He's already proposing $100 billion for Ukraine. People need to understand that rising waters raise all ships. This is actually good for Ukraine. What this actually does is delineate east and west now along the axis of Israel, NATO, and Russia, Iran. Now you might be saying to yourself, well, this already was the case. De facto, yes, it was. Now it is pretty much de jure. Israel and NATO are going to be aligned firmly, as if they weren't already, but with the United States, obviously, is where Israel gets a lot of its funding from. They are going to be firmly aligned and opposed to now the Iranian-Russian alliance, because many suspect that these groups, Hamas, Hezbollah, and it's not even so much of a suspicion, it's a matter of fact in many cases, because if you look on Iranian media, Lebanese media, Libyan media, they are praising the Palestinian, what they're calling an uprising. Of course, here in the West, we're calling it a terrorist attack. Again, I'm trying to present this as objectively as possible, because the last thing we need right now, guys, is another dividing line. And I do believe that there's people who benefit from dividing us along these particular issues. We've been divided along the pandemic. We've been divided along the George Floyd, divided along the climate stuff, divided along the gender stuff, the Ukraine stuff, and now this. There's nothing they want more than this schizophrenic milieu of a population who can't agree on anything and can easily be manipulated and controlled. Now, what's going to happen in Gaza, because you have 600,000 people there hardened okay? Tough people who are willing to sacrifice themselves. 300 to 500 miles of tunnels. They're way more heavily armed than before. As of making this video, things are popping off on the Lebanese border as well. So Hezbollah is getting ready to get going. They're starting to take out some radar towers in northern Israel. But in particular, Gaza, it's not going to be a walk in the park. It's going to be Bakhmut 2.0. Egypt's going to have their hands full with refugees. They're likely going to be sucked into this in some way, shape, or form. They're already sending in medical support. It's only a matter of time, perhaps, before they become aligned. Even possibly, I don't even know what what that's going to look like. It's only a matter of time before Israel starts instigating something with Iran, because if Iran is covertly funding a lot of this, providing them with a lot of these weapon systems, and yes, I know the Ukrainians are in a bit of hot water because apparently some people are suspecting that some of the weapons being used by Hamas to blow up helicopters, to blow up tanks, to blow up armored vehicles, to capture high-ranking generals in the Israeli military and numerous other hostages, some people are suspecting that they're using weapons that came from Ukraine, okay? So this is of great concern and importance, because what's likely going to happen is Israel is going to have to make a move on Iran, whether that's targeting another nuclear scientist, taking out nuclear research facilities, doing more, fighting them by proxy in either Syria or Iraq, or I don't even know all the details of that, but we can see this rift growing between Israel and Russia, essentially, because Russia and Iran are now very well aligned. They're very large trading partners, they're military allies, and you can see this delineation between East and West becoming more apparent and prominent and undeniable. Okay, the situation that we're currently in. It's basically Gog and Magog, to be brutally honest. Now, Israel's mobilizing more reserves from around the world. While they have superior firepower, and while they're going to carpet bomb things indiscriminately, and the Western media is going to completely downplay all the collateral damage, and they're going to continue to humanize the atrocities committed by the terrorists in Israel, it's always going to be one-sided reporting on that particular matter. Yes, it's going to be difficult, but it's not going to be a walk in the park when they try to do a ground invasion, when they actually have to go in there on the ground. And if you just turn Gaza into a Bakhmut and it's nothing but guys hiding in tunnels, it's just going to be a meat grinder, okay? It's going to be a total meat grinder. So what's going to happen? First, it's going to get really wild there. Then in the West Bank, it is going to pop off. Then it is going to, or probably right now as we speak, it's going off in the northern border in Lebanon. And once these things begin to intensify, Israel will have no choice but to confront the Iranians in some way, shape, or form, in proxy or directly. And then, of course, the United States gets involved. The Iranians potentially go to war with Israel and the United States. And I mean, that's just a whole nother can of worms. We're talking about the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, 20% of the world's oil taken off the market overnight. Oil prices skyrocket, the markets crash, shit hits the fan, okay? And now that repercusses into Ukraine and Russia, because as I said, what's likely going to happen, contrary to popular belief, Ukraine is going to get even more support after this. Once people get bored with this particular issue and things go back to Ukraine, there will be a newfound appreciation for the Ukrainian conflict. And I have been speculating for the last couple days that NATO needed a big attack because support for Ukraine was waning. And I should have made a dedicated video about it because, of course, 2 days later this happens. And this is exactly what they needed. Now, NATO needs an equivalent of this. And I don't say this like, obviously, like I want this to happen, but in order to drum up more support for Ukraine, Western countries who are providing this aid, they need to have a reason why. And the only way you get that is with a Gulf of Tonkin incident. You either need some civilians on the NATO side taken out in large enough numbers that you know, people get mad about it, and they press the governments for some retaliation, or they realize why they're supporting the Ukrainians. I should just be using air quotes for this whole video. You're never not going to piss anybody off, and that's what they want. They want us all divided, right? But I'm going to try to do my level best to bring you guys as objective an analysis as possible. It's important, above all else, that we just continue to get prepared for the whole system to just fall apart and deteriorate. So that could very well happen, that you see another, because as we approach this potential government shutdown once again, you almost need something that's going to unify the House in such a way to avert that. It could be this Israeli situation. It could be an attack against NATO that brings everybody back to pledging full support for Ukraine, because they can't let Russia win. They simply can't. They're not going to let Russia win. I mean, they're not just going to leave, because that would be a disaster. You know, I mean, it would be a disaster that would have economic repercussions that would be far worse than if they stayed and spent another $500 billion. Okay? So we know that Lavrov met with the Hamas leaders just in early September. So a lot of people find that a little bit suspicious, that there might be a Russian hand at play in that respect. Now, Israel has diplomatic ties with Russia. They have some financial relationship there. Obviously, they have a historical affinity for the liberation of the concentration camps in World War II and yada, yada, yada. But at the end of the day, they are primarily a U.S. ally, okay? They are a U.S. vassal, and as such, that's who they are beholden to. So if it ever goes down, and you have the Iranians siding with the Russians, well, we know who's going to be on whose side. Electricity has been cut off in the Gaza Strip, so it's only a matter of time before they do their ground invasion there, but it's not going to be a walk in the park. And I must advise people and just warn you once again, please do not let this become the focal point. They want people transfixed on this one issue suddenly for some reason. I guess it's just newness. It's the news. It's what people are talking about. What gets the mainstream media clicks. So they're going to play this out for a couple days. But remember, right now, there is a world war developing along multiple fronts as follows: Ukraine, Russia, Serbia, Kosovo, Armenia, Azerbaijan, Korea, North Korea, Niger versus the ECOWAS countries, Israeli, Palestine, Syria versus the world, Israel, Iran, Taiwan, China, to name a few, okay? Now, these fighters in Hamas are way more well-armed than they have been historically. I've been following this situation quite astutely since 2008, when the first Gaza war started. And at that time, they pretty much got the floor wiped with them. They were, you know, I think the Israelis lost like 20 guys, and Hamas in the Gaza Strip, they lost like 1,500 to 2,000. It wasn't even close. Well, the ratio is much closer this time around. They're shooting down helicopters. They've captured many tanks. They've captured armored vehicles. They're using drones. They're using man-pads, anti-tank weapons, some of which some people believe have been acquired from Ukraine somehow on the black market. They've captured an Israeli general, Nimrod Aloni, and that is confirmed. There is video, there is pictures of that online that are not faked, confirmed to be true. And yeah, it's not going to be as easy of a fight. And perhaps some people are suspecting, and according to my sources inside of Israel, and take this for what it's worth, allegedly there was some stand down orders, okay? And, you know, a lot of people are confused, and they're acting very naive to ask the question of how could this happen? Well, think about this. 3,000 to 5,000 rockets launched in a day which is more than they've launched on some of their most active years. There's no way that the Mossad, the Israeli intelligence, U.S. intelligence didn't catch wind that something was going on, that something was being planned. And this is on the scale that could easily be construed as like a third intifada, Yom Kippur War 2.0. It depends on what Egypt does and some of these surrounding countries. But this is something that could have been kept under wraps. So a lot of people are suspecting that maybe they allowed this to happen so to justify a broader war, to take attention away from Israel's own domestic disputes and civil unrest that they've been enduring for the past 2 years. Benjamin Netanyahu isn't that popular with a large part of the population there, and it's very likely that, when all else fails, they take you to war to take attention away from all of the division within your own society. So that's a possibility. The other question, though, is why now? Why time such a major full-scale war right now? Why now? And some people are saying, well, Russia has a lot to gain because it takes attention away from the Ukraine war. But as I've already reasoned or provided an argument that this is only going to make support for the Ukraine war increase, because a lot of this division you're seeing in the right, they're going to be divided now, but the pro-war sentiment is most people who are anti-war on the right, they're still pro, USA. They're still pro-Western. They don't support the Russians. They just don't want to give money to Ukraine. But now that you get them riled up with this stuff going on in the Middle East, they're foaming at the mouth to get more hawkish on what's going on there. I think that they're more easier to acquiesce to more funding for the aid in Ukraine when they see the relationship between what's going on in Israel and Ukraine and that axis developing between Iran and Russia. I think that this is only going to increase support. So you're seeing division right now. You're seeing a lot of people come after Jordan Peterson for being such a hardline pro-Israeli guy. The same thing with Robert F. Kennedy, who people were championing as, the dissident on the COVID issue and Ukraine and this and that and whatever. So people are starting to, a popular tweet is that while it was nice to have the right as the anti-war, well, it lasted. And here we go again. And I've always known that there's been a divide amongst the right. The neoliberals, they want war with Russia, and the neocons, well, they want war with everybody. But on the right, they're quicker to take to war with Islamic countries, China. That a lot of them seem to be pressing more for war with those countries for some reason. Anyways, we're more divided than ever before. That's abundantly clear, and it's only going to get worse. Now, on the issue of what's going on in Russia, we got to keep our eyes on that. There's some unsubstantiated reports that there are B-2 bombers headed towards Europe. I would say whether or not this is true, the fact that they are getting bombers ready in the first place, Russia would view that as an excuse to ratchet up their own DEFCON equivalent. So if Russia sees that we're preparing bombers, strategic bombers, because it's not like you can just, nuclear war breaks out. If you're not on a high DEFCON level and state of combat readiness, then it takes days to get that leg of the nuclear triad operational. It takes days to load them up with nukes and get everything, dusted off. So if Russia sees that we're now at a level where we are able to do that immediately within a few hours, then that's a concern. That's an increased level of DEFCON. We were speaking yesterday about a topic that I brought up from somebody who is very knowledgeable on the issue with respect to some different strategic nuclear strategy, I guess you could say, that people perhaps have not considered with respect to GPS jamming and detonating nuclear weapons in order to create EMP pulses as a defense against a nuclear attack. If you go back to that video, you'll see that I pinned a top comment, a response to a lot of the constructive criticism that we received on that video. And I think it explains a lot. So if you have any questions about that, but what we're seeing here is an escalation. We're seeing the expulsion of diplomats. 2 more diplomats were expelled from the United States today. Just today, there was a Russian fighter jet scrambled to intercept a U.S. patrol plane near its airspace in and around the Norwegian Sea. It was a P-8A Poseidon aircraft all along Russia's borders, from Finland to the Baltic states, to the Arctic, to the, all along the Ukraine front, to Belarus, Poland, the northern parts of Ukraine, in the Black Sea especially. You're seeing a greater and greater NATO presence, okay? You're seeing more weapon systems being deployed to that front that are nuclear capable. That puts Russia on edge. I think it's beyond a shadow of a doubt now, especially after those emergency alerts and nuclear war drills that we've seen in the last week, that we are most definitely at a higher DEFCON level. Again, this is confidential. You're never going to know the DEFCON level. You have to use inductive reasoning. What are you seeing? Because it is classified information. There's websites that pretend to be the official DEFCON website. There's no such thing. It's completely confidential, much alike a lot of the different technology related to strategic warfare that me and you are just not privy to. That's what we were trying to propose to you in the video yesterday. There have been continuing drone attacks in Moscow. There is evidence, I should say, that Russia is building complex, multi-leveled bunkers in and around the direction of Tokmak because they're concerned that the Ukrainians may still make a breakthrough. And again, Biden is now going to press for $100 billion in aid. Before it was $65 billion, he's going for $100 billion. So are we going to see the unintended consequences of this, or perhaps intended consequences of this new support for Israel? Is it going to raise all ships for the war hawks? Is it going to lead to more funding for Ukraine? Again, this is potentially going to just cause every other conflict that is out there to, what we're seeing is dominoes fall. So when one of these things goes, it amplifies the effect, negative consequences of everything else. So every other conflict, as the Russia-Ukraine war spirals out of control, throws out sparks, and all of these other conflicts intensify, and they have a similar effect in the surrounding regions. And it's very likely we're going to see the entire region ensnared in conflict. I wouldn't be surprised by the time I upload this video, we find that Israel and Lebanon are in a full state of war. And if that happens, it's only a matter of time before, and remember, Israel is a nuclear nation, a nuclear superpower, I would say. There's some estimates they have about 400 nukes. It won't be long before Iran gets directly involved, or before they are forced to get involved in some way, shape, or form. Where the Saudis sit, where the Qataris sit, where the Yemenis, where all those countries, I'm not an expert in Middle Eastern geopolitics, but it's pretty clear that as you see economic contraction around the world, the general principle is that you're going to see more and more conflict. And yeah, it's going to be a long, cold winter for a lot of people. Not in the Middle East, but in Europe especially. So we're going to see what the markets do come Monday morning. And let me know what you guys think about everything I've discussed in the comment section below. Do you think that this was a let it happen on purpose situation? What do you think the implications are going to be for Ukraine? Do you think that this war is going to spread to the surrounding regions? How do you think this is going to affect the global markets? And above all else, just keep on prepping, because we're living in unprecedented times. We're always hearing about these weather events now. More rain fell in a day than has fallen in previous years. And you've seen the same thing, only today it wasn't rain, it was rockets. We're living in the age of extremes. And whether it's the government shutting down, whether it's the first time the Speaker of the House has been ejected. Everything, one thing after another. The banking crisis earlier in the year, all of this nuclear testing that they're about to commence. It's all unprecedented. And we're living in the age of extremes, and you got to be prepared. There's going to be some normalcy Normans out there who, I don't know if it's just their neurons are fried, their synaptic connections are fried from so much TikTok brain, like that synapses, the dopamine has just fried their brain that, you know, it doesn't matter how many bad things happen, one after another, they continue to think that nothing can happen here because it hasn't happened yet. Okay, well, for your sake, I hope so. But for everybody else, make sure you have a plan, and it never hurts. And that doesn't mean you live in fear. It just means that you stay prepared, you stay aware, because if you're not a prepper, this day and age, well, I don't know. Maybe Darwin has something in store for you. Put it that way. All right. Thanks for watching, guys. Take care.